The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of Cathara 7, a moon so cold that breath crystallized before it left the lungs. Dr. Ellen Hayes pulled her thermal coat tighter, her fingers numb despite the insulated gloves. She had been stranded here for 3 days after her research vessel crashed during a routine survey mission. The distress beacon was active, but rescue could take weeks in this remote sector. She should have been focused on survival. Instead, she stood at the edge of a shallow cave, staring at 4 small bodies huddled in the darkness. Predator cubs. Rixian predators, to be exact. Apex hunters of this frozen world, capable of tearing through reinforced steel when fully grown. Their parents were the stuff of nightmares across a dozen systems, creatures that the Galactic Council had classified as kill on sight in populated zones. But these weren't nightmares. They were children. The smallest one, no bigger than a terrier, lifted its head weakly. Its silver fur was matted with ice, and its 6 eyes blinked slowly, struggling to focus. Ellen recognized hypothermia when she saw it. The cubs had been abandoned, likely because their mother had died and the pack couldn't afford to feed extra mouths during the harsh winter season. "Damn it," Ellen muttered, her breath forming white clouds. Every survival manual, every regulation, every ounce of common sense told her to walk away. These creatures would grow into killing machines. Saving them was illogical, dangerous, possibly suicidal, but they were dying now, and Ellen Hayes had never been good at walking away from dying things. She gathered what little combustible material she could find: dried fungal stalks from the cave walls, strips of synthetic fabric from her emergency kit, and a few branches of the hardy thorn trees that somehow grew in Cathara's frozen soil. Within 20 minutes, she had a fire crackling at the cave's entrance, positioned carefully to reflect warmth inward while keeping smoke venting outward. The cubs stirred at the sudden heat. The largest, still barely the size of a large dog, hissed weakly, a sound meant to be threatening but came out pitiful. Ellen stayed near the fire, giving them space, watching as they slowly, hesitantly, crawled toward the warmth. The smallest cub, Ellen found herself thinking of him as Renak, though she had no idea if Rixians even had names at this age, came closest. He dragged himself across the frozen stone until he was less than a meter from the flames, then collapsed, his body shaking violently as it tried to warm itself too quickly. "Easy," Ellen whispered, though she knew he couldn't understand human speech. She opened her ration pack and tossed a protein bar toward the cubs. They ignored it. Of course, they were carnivores, and alien carnivores at that. Her food meant nothing to them. She would have to hunt. The irony wasn't lost on her. A human hunting to feed predators. But if she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. Using a makeshift spear crafted from a metal strut and some climbing cable, Ellen spent the next 4 hours tracking and killing one of Cathara's ice rabbits, a bulky, 6-legged creature with more fat than meat. She dragged it back to the cave as darkness fell completely, the temperature plummeting to lethal levels. The cubs devoured the carcass. Even weak as they were, their feeding frenzy was terrifying, a reminder of what they would become. But for now, they were just hungry children, and when they finished, they curled around each other near the fire, their bellies full for the first time in days. Ellen fed the fire throughout the night. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. If the flames died, so would the cubs. And possibly her too. The temperature had dropped to -40, and her suit's heating system was already running on reserve power. But it wasn't just the cold that kept her awake. Twice during the night, she heard movement outside the cave. Large movement. The scrape of claws on ice, the low rumble of something massive circling the perimeter. Cathara's adult Rixians, drawn by the scent of the cubs or perhaps the unusual sight of fire. Ellen gripped her plasma cutter, a tool, not a weapon, but it would have to do. She positioned herself between the fire and the cave entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. The Alpha appeared at the cave mouth just after midnight. It was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with silver-white fur and eyes that glowed like ice catching starlight. It could have killed her in seconds, but it didn't attack. It stood there, watching the human who had built a fire. Watching the human who stood guard over cubs that weren't her own. Watching the human who hadn't slept, who was shaking with cold and exhaustion, but who hadn't moved from her post. The Alpha's eyes shifted to the cubs, especially to Renak, who had crawled even closer to Ellen during the night. seeking both warmth and some instinctive sense of protection. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the alpha dipped its massive head, a gesture Ellen couldn't interpret but that felt significant, and melted back into the darkness. She didn't sleep even after it left. By dawn, the cubs were stronger. They could stand without shaking, and their eyes were brighter. Rhynak stayed close to Ellen, his small body pressed against her leg, a strange trust forming that defied biology and logic. Her rescue beacon finally received a response that morning. A ship would arrive within hours. Ellen should have felt relief, but instead she felt something else entirely. She looked down at Rhynak, who was watching her with those 6 crystalline eyes. "You're going to be okay," she said softly, knowing he couldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. "You're going to grow up strong. And maybe—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish that thought. Maybe someday the galaxy would remember this moment. Not the moment humanity proved it could conquer or dominate, but the moment it proved it could protect. Even the monsters. Even the ones that might someday be enemies. Because that was what separated humans from the cold mathematics of survival that governed most species. Humans lit fires in the darkness. Humans stayed awake guarding the vulnerable. Humans made illogical, dangerous, beautiful choices, and sometimes that made all the difference. When the rescue ship arrived, Ellen reported the cubs' location to the xenobiological authorities, recommending relocation to a preserve rather than extermination. She didn't know if they'd listen, but as she left Kethera 7 behind, she looked back one last time at the cave where a small fire still burned, and where 4 cubs, especially one small one named in her heart as Rhynak, had learned that not all intelligent species would leave them to freeze in the dark.